It begins not with fireworks, but with silence. A silence so unnaturally deep, so disturbingly still, that it feels like the very air has been swallowed by something unspeakable. That's how it often starts, isn't it? Not with chaos, but with quiet. A quiet hallway in Kensington Palace. A quiet envelope passed between gloved hands. A quiet conversation behind closed oak doors, thick enough to muffle screams. And, somewhere in that silence, Princess Diana, a woman branded both saint and threat, realizes that she's being watched. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Not just by cameras, not just by the tabloids that hounded her with the force of 1,000 invisible daggers, but watched in ways she couldn't see, listened to, followed, tracked. Years later, that same silence is broken, not by the institution that wronged her, not by the press that betrayed her trust, but by her youngest son. A man no longer interested in preserving the myth, but in setting fire to it. And the first match is lit with a single, bone-chilling sentence. "I will destroy you all." The voice is unmistakable. The eyes, tired and hollow. The man speaking isn't a prince in the traditional sense anymore. No medals, no titles, no scripted handshakes or palace smiles. This is Prince Harry, stripped down to something rawer than royalty. A son carrying the ghost of a mother who died running from the very crown she once served. What he holds now isn't rumor. It isn't hearsay, scandalous gossip, or the recycled whisperings of royal biographers. It is, according to insiders close to the Duke of Sussex, a cache of irrefutable documentation, recordings, and testimonies that trace back decades and point to something few dared say aloud: that his own father, Charles, now king, was complicit in the surveillance of Diana, and not just complicit in passing. Harry's claims, set to be unveiled in what sources call a nuclear exposé, go further: that Charles authorized the tapping of Diana's phones, that she was tracked in the final months of her life by operatives answering to royal instruction, that even her car, the black Mercedes that crashed in that Paris tunnel, was not beyond their reach. If true, these revelations would not just unravel public opinion of the monarchy, they would raze it to the ground. But before we race ahead into scandal, let's rewind. Because every empire that falls has a beginning. And in this story, the fall begins with a mother's fear and a son's promise. It was in the final months of 1996, as Diana's public image soared in ways the monarchy could never control, that the warning signs began to surface. Friends say she often felt followed, stared at. Phones would ring without sound on the other end. Her calendar would be leaked before she could brief her staff. Her calls to close confidants often echoed. Something her security advisors flagged as a red flag for wiretaps. She confided in Paul Burrell, her former butler and loyal aide, who once claimed she told him, "They're going to do something to me. They're watching. I can feel it." Not in a moment of melodrama, but with chilling conviction. Those close to Diana say she began documenting everything, recording audio diaries, writing notes, leaving instructions for friends if something were to happen. That wasn't paranoia. That was preparation. And then, just as quickly, she was gone. August 31st, 1997. The Pont de l'Alma Tunnel. A city that never sleeps, reduced to the scream of twisted metal and flashing sirens. A woman, beloved by millions, pronounced dead in a foreign hospital. And a boy, 12 years old, forced to walk behind his mother's coffin under the weight of a nation's grief. What child could endure that and not question the silence? Harry did what he was told. For years, played the part, smiled when asked, stayed within the script, even as his own questions about that night, about the months leading up to it, were met with silence. His father, distant. His brother, obedient. The institution, unshaken. But grief doesn't rot away. It ferments. It's 2025 now, and Harry is no longer that child. Nor is he the tabloid villain he was painted to be during the chaos of Megxit. No. This Harry is something else entirely. A man unbound by protocol, unafraid of exile, and equipped with something far more dangerous than a memoir: proof. And now he's ready to use it. This video isn't just about what Harry intends to reveal. It's about the weight of generational silence. The way the monarchy, for all its pageantry and tradition, has built a fortress on secrets. And within those walls, Diana's memory was buried, not honored. Not mourned, just filed away, like a liability too volatile to face. But Harry never forgot, and he never stopped searching. According to multiple sources close to the Sussex camp, the files Harry plans to release in a series of public disclosures include confidential security briefings linking Charles to surveillance directives, redacted MI5 documents detailing listening devices placed in Diana's homes and vehicles, testimony from a retired intelligence operative who claims the order to monitor Diana came from the highest royal authority, audio recordings of Diana speaking about being followed and her belief that someone within the royal family wanted her silenced. It sounds unbelievable, like the script of a political thriller. But for Harry, it is not fiction. It is history. A history that was scrubbed clean by handlers and palace advisors. A history that nearly destroyed his mother, and by extension, him. Why is he choosing to release it now? That question lingers heavy in the air, and multiple interpretations have emerged. Some believe it's revenge. A final act of rebellion from a man pushed to the edge. Others argue it's grief, still unprocessed, taking the form of justice. But there's a third explanation, and perhaps the most human one: truth. Because how does a son sit with evidence that his mother was hunted, not by enemies of the state, but by members of her own family, and stay quiet? Harry's upcoming revelations, if they reach the public in their unfiltered form, could upend everything. The monarchy has weathered storms before, abdications, affairs, scandals, but nothing of this magnitude. This isn't about tradition. This isn't even about politics. This is about a mother's death, a father's betrayal, and a son's refusal to let the past stay buried. As this story unfolds, we will take you through the labyrinth of secrets, surveillance, and royal power games. We'll examine the historical context, the media manipulation, and the eerie synchronicity between Diana's suspicions and Harry's proof. You will hear names. You will hear dates. You will see how the royal image was protected, not by truth, but by silence. And by the end, you may never look at the crown the same way again. This isn't just a story. This is a reckoning. And it starts now. It started with what appeared to be a simple request, a call arranged under the pretense of reconciliation. Prince Harry, now residing in California with Meghan and their children, was invited to speak directly with King Charles. No advisors, no aides, just father and son, connected over a secure line, thousands of miles apart, in two worlds that could not have felt more distant. But this was no ordinary conversation. It wasn't filled with pleasantries or soft attempts at healing. According to multiple sources close to the Sussexes, it spiraled into something far darker. The tone, they say, shifted within minutes. What began with a father appealing for understanding soon turned into a thinly veiled warning. The voice on the other end of the line wasn't pleading for forgiveness. It was trying to contain a threat that was no longer hypothetical, but very, very real. Charles, now king, spoke not as a grieving widower or even as a concerned father, but as a monarch trying to protect an empire. And the message was clear: don't do this. Don't go public. Don't say what you know. Don't destroy what your mother helped build, even if it was the very thing that destroyed her. What Charles might not have realized, however, was that the Harry on the other end of the line wasn't the boy who had walked behind his mother's coffin. He wasn't the royal who once begged for permission to marry Meghan. He wasn't even the Duke of Sussex anymore, not in spirit. He was a man haunted by truth, burning with rage, and determined to hold someone, anyone, accountable for decades of silence. And that's when he said it. According to two anonymous but independently corroborated insiders, Harry ended the call with words that chilled even those who had grown accustomed to royal dysfunction. "I will destroy you all." It wasn't screamed. It wasn't shouted in anger. It was spoken like a sentence, final, cold, and absolute. And that's when Charles knew the battle he feared most had finally begun. From that moment forward, the palace went into full lockdown. Communications teams began crafting counter-narratives. Longtime loyalists were briefed. Legal threats were quietly discussed. They didn't know how much Harry had, or how he planned to release it, but they knew one thing with certainty: he was done playing the game. It is said that the monarchy, for all its pomp and ritual, survives on illusion. The illusion of unity. The illusion of heritage. The illusion that everything within the palace walls is more divine than political. But illusions shatter under pressure. especially when someone knows where the cracks already are. Harry had grown up in the shadow of those illusions. For years, he was groomed to support his brother, to smile for the cameras, to behave. And for years, he tried, even as he felt his mother's death being reduced to a footnote in royal history, even as the tabloids turned his grief into headlines, even as he watched his own wife endure the same coordinated media assault that had nearly broken his mother. But the final betrayal wasn't public. It wasn't even something printed in the papers. It was private. It was buried in files, in letters, in whispers shared behind thick curtains in marble corridors. And those whispers painted a horrifying picture, one that would follow Harry every time he looked into his children's eyes. Because buried in those documents, according to sources close to Harry's inner circle, was evidence that Charles had authorized surveillance on Diana in the months before her death. Not speculation, not rumor, but actual intelligence requests. Orders to monitor her communications, track her movements, tap her phone lines. The reason? Control. In the aftermath of her separation from Charles, Diana was no longer predictable. She no longer followed the script. She was dating outside the monarchy. She was speaking to the press without approval. She was working with charities the crown couldn't vet. To them, she had become unstable. Not mentally, but institutionally. The files, reportedly passed to Harry through an anonymous intermediary connected to an ex-MI5 official, detail surveillance operations labeled under vague code names. Project Wintergarden is one of them. Echo Light is another. These names mean little to the public, but to those in intelligence circles, they hint at operations that combine domestic tracking with full-spectrum communications monitoring. One document, according to sources, shows a list of locations Diana visited frequently in her final weeks, all marked with timestamps and summaries of who she met, what she said, and where she went next. Another includes redacted transcripts of calls she made to a trusted friend, conversations Harry had never heard until now, including moments where Diana speaks of being afraid to drive alone, of being followed by vehicles with tinted windows, and of seeing the same faces at different events. One conversation, in particular, is said to have shaken Harry deeply. Diana tells the unknown recipient on the other end, "If anything happens to me, look to the palace first. They'll never let me go quietly." It's a chilling line, but it's not new. Variations of it have been whispered for years. What makes it different now, Harry insists, is the documentation, the dates, the signatures, the classified nature of the files, and most damning of all, the initials on the bottom of one memo, CW. Charles Windsor. The implications are staggering. If Harry goes public with this, it won't just challenge his father's moral character. It could force questions in Parliament. It could trigger investigations into the use of intelligence services on domestic soil. It could ignite a constitutional crisis, especially if the files suggest that taxpayer-funded resources were used to spy on a private citizen, even one as high-profile as Diana. But why now? That's what many insiders are still asking. Why choose this moment to detonate a bomb that could engulf the entire institution in scandal? Some say it's timing. The monarchy, they argue, is more vulnerable than ever. Charles is aging, public confidence is fragile, and the post-Elizabethan era has brought more questions than stability. Others believe it's personal. Harry, they say, has finally crossed the emotional threshold. Years of therapy, estrangement, and reflection have brought him to a single, devastating conclusion. The monarchy cannot be reformed from within. But perhaps it's simpler than that. Perhaps it's not about timing or revenge. Perhaps, for Harry, it's about justice. A justice long denied to the woman who gave him life, love, and, ultimately, the burden of truth. In the coming chapters, we'll walk through the details of Harry's alleged evidence. We'll examine the role of MI5. We'll revisit the day Diana died and ask new questions about what might have been done or deliberately not done. We'll bring you into the silence behind the crown, the whispers that echo in its halls, and the fury of a son who refuses to stay quiet. Because when a man like Harry says, "I will destroy you all," it's not a threat. It's a promise. For those who knew her intimately, Princess Diana's charm was never what defined her. Not the elegance she carried in her walk, not the famous head tilts, nor the timeless smile. It wasn't even the flashbulbs that followed her every movement across continents. No, What made Diana unforgettable was something far more disquieting. She felt things deeply, and often before anyone else did. It was a gift, but also a curse. Because that sensitivity didn't just make her a humanitarian icon. It made her hyper-aware of danger, especially when that danger was masked behind protocol and royal crests. In the final months of her life, Diana wasn't just paranoid. She was terrified. Not in a theatrical way, but in the cold, calculated behavior of someone who knows, beyond doubt, that they are being watched. She began saying things to friends and confidants that, at the time, seemed alarmist, even absurd. But with the benefit of hindsight, and with the information Harry claims to possess, those statements no longer sound dramatic. They sound prophetic. Let's go back to late 1996. The divorce had been finalized. Diana was free. At least, that's what the world thought. She no longer had to answer to the palace. No more royal duties. No more walking 2 steps behind a man who barely disguised his contempt for her. On paper, she had finally escaped the shadow of the monarchy. But in reality, the scrutiny intensified. At that point, Diana had become a wild card. She was dating outside the realm of British nobility. Her influence among the global elite, celebrities, and political figures had grown so rapidly that she was beginning to eclipse the monarchy itself. Her campaign against landmines, her work with AIDS patients, her interviews, they were no longer safe, soft charity work. They were political, disruptive, and unpredictable. And the monarchy doesn't do unpredictable. According to her former bodyguard, Ken Worf, Diana began expressing genuine concern about her safety during this time. She was convinced that someone within the royal household was monitoring her movements. She changed phone numbers repeatedly. She started using secure lines, not for state secrets, but to simply call her friends. In one conversation, she reportedly told Worf, "They want to shut me up. They see me as a threat." But who were they? At first, the idea seemed too nebulous. Some assumed she was referring to the press, which had hounded her from the moment her engagement was announced. Others suspected palace courtiers, who were known to leak information selectively to maintain control over the narrative. But Diana's instincts pointed higher, much higher. She believed someone within the royal inner circle had the means, motive, and machinery to keep her under constant surveillance. Whether that was Charles himself or those acting on his unspoken wishes, she couldn't say for certain. But she knew it wasn't just the media. This was something deeper, something state-level, something institutional. One of the most chilling pieces of evidence that supports Diana's claims is a letter she wrote to her former butler, Paul Burrell. Written just weeks before her death, the note reads, "This particular phase in my life is the most dangerous. My husband is planning an accident in my car, brake failure, and serious head injury." At the time, that letter was brushed aside by many as melodrama, a princess overstating her fears. But why would she commit such a detailed and specific accusation to paper unless she believed it wholeheartedly? And more importantly, why did that exact scenario, a fatal car accident, end up claiming her life? When this letter resurfaced in the years following her death, it was dismissed by official channels. The royal family never commented on it. The letter was labeled a curiosity, a tragic artifact of a woman unraveling. But Harry sees it differently. According to insiders, that letter became a cornerstone in his personal investigation. It wasn't proof, but it was a map. And when he began tracing that map, talking to those who had once worked for his mother, digging through archive files, analyzing what the public had ignored, a horrifying pattern began to emerge. Several of Diana's close friends have spoken out in recent years. One of them, Simone Simmons, a well-known psychic and confidant to Diana, claimed that Diana had expressed extreme fear in the months before her death. "She was certain she was going to be killed," Simmons said. "She told me so many times, they're going to do it. I just don't know when." The idea of being watched wasn't abstract to Diana. It was tangible. She would notice unfamiliar cars parked near her residence, unmarked vans appearing at different locations she visited. On more than one occasion, she claimed to have seen the same man following her in different disguises, sometimes as a tourist, sometimes as a delivery driver. Her fears were not just documented in conversations, but in her own notes. She kept diaries, many of which were seized or mysteriously disappeared after her death. Harry, in his own quiet way, began recovering those notes. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to paint a picture of a woman gaslit by the institution she once trusted. Enough to suggest that her death, while ruled an accident, was surrounded by too many coincidences to be dismissed. One moment that Harry reportedly holds onto with painful clarity is a conversation he overheard as a boy, a phone call Diana took in the hallway of their home. He doesn't remember every word, but he remembers the expression on her face, sharp, pale, and frightened. After she hung up, she sat in silence for nearly an hour. When Harry asked her what was wrong, she simply replied, "Nothing, darling. Just ghosts." Those ghosts, it seems, never left her. And now they haunt Harry. Her fears weren't baseless. They were ignored. Ignored by the press, who were too busy hunting for scandal. Ignored by the palace, who saw her as a liability. Ignored by the establishment, which feared what she might say if left unchecked. One of the lesser-known stories that adds weight to her fears occurred just months before her death. Diana reportedly reached out to the American Embassy in London, inquiring about potential asylum in the United States. She was considering moving to New York. Friends say she wanted a clean slate, a new life far away from the webs of monarchy and media. She never made that move. Some speculate she was talked out of it. Others believe she was never meant to escape. Whether Diana's fears were born from direct threats or a culmination of years of institutional gaslighting, the result was the same. A woman desperate to protect herself and her children, trapped in a palace of secrets. And Harry remembers it all. He remembers the way adults brushed off her concerns. He remembers how the official investigations felt more like exercises in reputation management than truth-seeking. He remembers watching his mother grow thinner, quieter, more fragile, not because she was weak, but because the walls were closing in. In the years that followed, Harry stayed quiet. For a time, he even tried to convince himself that perhaps the world had gotten it wrong, that maybe his mother had imagined it, that maybe there really was no grand conspiracy. But deep down, the questions never stopped gnawing at him. And then came the files. Then came the voices of former intelligence operatives, the technicians who claimed to have installed devices in Diana's cars and homes. The unnamed sources who risked everything to speak, now that time had dulled their fear of retribution. The redacted documents, the surveillance logs, the records of phone taps. Suddenly, Diana's warnings weren't just eerie premonitions. They were evidence. In this chapter of the story, we don't just hear Diana's voice. We feel her desperation, her courage in the face of invisible threats, her attempts to warn those around her, even when it put her reputation at risk. And above all, her fierce, almost primal determination to protect her sons from the world that tried to consume her. And now, nearly 3 decades after her death, one of those sons is picking up where she left off. Not for fame, not for revenge, but for her. The phrase "smoking gun" is thrown around a lot, in headlines, in courtrooms, in scandalous books that promise more than they deliver. But rarely does it surface in real life with the kind of weight that forces a country, an institution, and a legacy to tremble. And yet, that is exactly what Prince Harry now claims to possess. Not a theory, not a metaphor, actual proof. It came not in the form of a whistleblower stepping into the light, nor in a sensational leak plastered across tabloids. It arrived quietly, subtly, passed hand to hand in plain manila envelopes and encrypted emails. Pieces of a story long buried. And when put together, they suggest something far more horrifying than the public has ever been told. According to trusted sources close to Harry's team, the most damning document came from a retired intelligence official who served under MI5 during the mid-1990s. This man, whose identity remains undisclosed for his safety, allegedly reached out to Harry after years of silence, moved, not by fame or money, but by guilt. He claimed to have been part of a surveillance operation directed not at foreign enemies, but at one of the most beloved women in British history, Princess Diana. He was not the only one. Multiple former agents, some officially retired, others quietly dismissed over the decades, have confirmed the existence of a targeted domestic operation. The purpose? Monitor Diana's communications, her movements, and her associations, particularly her growing closeness to individuals outside British nobility, including high-profile figures in the Middle East. At the time, Diana was becoming dangerously independent. No longer a royal wife. She was a global symbol of compassion and rebellion. And to those in power, particularly within the palace and its extensions into British intelligence, that independence was considered a threat. Among the documents presented to Harry were internal memos, intelligence logs, and communication summaries marked with both MI5 and Royal Liaison stamps. These were not accidental inclusions. They were part of coordinated intelligence briefings delivered to senior royal figures. And one name allegedly appears more than once in the clearance chain: Charles Windsor. The implications are staggering. One document, dated 3 months before Diana's death, outlines a directive labeled Enhanced Passive Surveillance. Subject: Diana Spencer. It details a request for increased monitoring of her vehicle movements, phone records, and known contacts. The form includes handwritten annotations from a senior intelligence officer referencing a sensitive escalation request from sovereign-level channels. For a civilian to appear in such an internal memo would be disturbing. For a senior royal to do so, especially one positioned to ascend the throne, is unprecedented. That same document, according to sources who viewed it, includes an attached log of phone conversations Diana had with her personal physician, her spiritual advisor, and a foreign diplomat. The conversations, while personal, contained remarks about Diana's desire to distance herself completely from royal life, even to the point of permanently moving abroad. The documents also show surveillance orders that weren't just reactive, they were preemptive. They weren't just observing her behavior. They were anticipating it, planning for it, preparing contingencies should she go too far, speak too loudly, or associate with the wrong people. That level of coordination does not happen without high-level approval. In addition to the paperwork, Harry was reportedly presented with 2 items that shook him to his core. The first was an internal briefing from 1997 warning that Diana may soon initiate contact with hostile press to discuss the treatment she had received by the Crown and its allies. The language is clinical, detached. It refers to her not as a woman or a mother, but as a liability. The second was more personal. A recording, static-laced, rough audio, clearly pulled from a line not meant to be tapped. In the recording, Diana is heard speaking softly, her voice weary but alert. She is telling a friend she doesn't feel safe, that she's being watched, that the Crown has eyes in places I didn't even know existed. She pauses, then says something Harry reportedly plays over and over again. They think this ends if I go away. But it doesn't, because Harry will know. One day he'll know. For Harry, that wasn't just a prediction. It was a prophecy, and it became his mission. The process of verifying the documents has taken years. Quiet consultations with former intelligence experts, cross-referencing with palace logs, coordinated legal teams combing through the UK's Official Secrets Act to determine what can legally be shared without endangering lives. This wasn't about revenge. It was about building an unassailable case, one that couldn't be denied, spun, or buried. To Harry, this is the difference between conspiracy and truth. The public has long speculated about what really happened in the days leading up to Diana's death. But speculation is easy to ignore. These files, these voices, these signatures, they are harder to dismiss. Even more chilling is what wasn't in the files, because several key documents appear to be missing, redacted beyond recognition or listed in archival indexes as withdrawn. When investigators asked where those files went, no clear answer was given. Some were lost, others classified beyond review. One, according to a former intelligence archivist, was personally removed from storage by Palace Courier. That document, reportedly titled Contingency Plan, Subject, DS, Princess of Wales, has never been recovered. Harry believes it holds the final piece of the puzzle, the answer to whether or not a plan to remove Diana was ever formalized. He has vowed to find it. And if he does, he says, it will bring down the House of Windsor. The palace, predictably, has refused to comment. They have not denied the authenticity of the documents. They have not confirmed them either. But insiders report a growing unease within Buckingham and Clarence House. Meetings have increased. Legal teams have been quietly assembled. There are fears that Harry may release the documents publicly, unfiltered, to journalists or digital platforms outside British jurisdiction. That move would be irreversible. If made, it would trigger the largest crisis in the monarchy's modern history. Not a scandal of sex or money, but of betrayal, of moral failure, and of potential criminal liability. And so, the question looms, why hasn't Harry done it yet? The answer may lie in strategy. According to those close to him, Harry doesn't just want public outrage. He wants reform, justice, accountability, and he wants to give those responsible, including his own father, a chance to speak before the tidal wave hits. But time is running out, and every day that passes increases the risk that someone else, from within the palace or beyond, will act first to discredit, suppress, or sabotage the effort. That's why Harry has moved fast in recent months, allegedly creating multiple backups of the files, stored in international cloud servers, physical hard drives, and encrypted USB devices hidden in safe locations. A full dossier has already been passed to legal teams in the United States, with instructions on when to release should something happen to him or Meghan. It is a chilling but calculated move, one that echoes the very paranoia his mother once endured. But as Harry sees it, this isn't paranoia. It's preparation. And while the palace may believe that silence still holds power, that old secrets will stay buried, the documents in Harry's possession suggest otherwise. Because in those pages, in those recordings, in the whispers of men who can no longer live with their complicity, the truth is no longer hiding. It's waiting, waiting to be told, waiting to be heard, waiting to end the lie. The crash that ended Princess Diana's life on August 31st, 1997, has been retold so many times that the details have become almost mythological. A speeding black Mercedes, a tunnel in Paris, flashbulbs exploding behind them, a driver later revealed to have been intoxicated, a chaotic aftermath that left a princess, her companion, and a driver dead. The only survivor, a bodyguard who would spend years in silence. But myths serve a purpose. They simplify chaos. They tidy up loose ends. And in doing so, they bury what cannot be easily explained. The official narrative was quick and decisive. Henri Paul, the driver, was drunk. He lost control at high speed while trying to escape the relentless pursuit of paparazzi. It was tragic, but accidental. A case closed within the year. But the deeper you look into that story, the more the foundation begins to shift. The more inconsistencies surface. The more questions start to claw through the official version, and the more it begins to look like something was tampered with. Not just a car, but the entire truth. For years, whispers circulated about the condition of the Mercedes S280 that carried Diana and Dodi Al-Fayed that night. Owned not by the Ritz Paris, but leased. A vehicle that had, curiously, been involved in a previous accident and had undergone repairs before being returned to service. Yet no one in the public was informed of this. It was brushed aside as irrelevant. But it wasn't irrelevant. Not to Diana, and certainly not to the experts who later analyzed the crash. In the files Harry reportedly obtained, there is a shocking addition, a mechanical analysis report, dated 2 weeks before the crash, detailing unresolved issues with the vehicle's steering column and anti-lock braking system. The report allegedly states that while the car was deemed roadworthy, the integrity of certain systems was not optimal under high-speed conditions. This detail might sound technical, but in the context of what happened in that tunnel, it could be explosive. Multiple forensic investigators have long speculated that the vehicle behaved unusually during the crash. It didn't follow the arc expected of a driver simply losing control. The Mercedes veered at a strange angle, one that suggested overcorrection, or a possible mechanical fault that prevented regaining control. Harry's documents include a second file, a private investigation commissioned by Mohammed Al-Fayed, Dodi's father, who had long refused to accept the official explanation. His hired experts reportedly found signs that the vehicle's braking system may have been tampered with. One expert, a former military mechanic, stated in an interview years ago that the brake lines showed signs of microscopic interference, consistent with sabotage using non-standard fluid displacement. In simpler terms, the brakes may have been intentionally weakened. This theory was never explored in the official British inquest. Why? Because the French authorities refused to fully cooperate with British investigators on key mechanical data. When the car was finally returned, it had already been stripped down. Parts were missing. Chain of custody was broken. No complete forensic analysis could be performed. And just like that, the evidence vanished. Harry, however, has since located someone who claims to have examined the vehicle before it was returned. A retired French engineer who had been subcontracted to perform an independent safety check. In a series of recorded interviews, the man says he was instructed to observe but not report. When he questioned the integrity of the brake system, his report was dismissed and never entered into the formal file. He now says, under a pseudonym, that the Mercedes was not safe, not for that speed, not for that level of pursuit, and certainly not for royalty. But the evidence doesn't stop with mechanics. There's the matter of the CCTV cameras in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. Inexplicably, every single one of them, every camera in that stretch of tunnel, failed to record usable footage. Some were under maintenance. Others simply malfunctioned. The odds of that happening randomly, statistically negligible. And yet, no one was held accountable. No investigation into the failure. No audit of the systems. Just silence. What Harry has now uncovered, through international digital forensics experts, is a short audio clip, reportedly captured from a nearby commercial vehicle's dash-mounted security recorder. The audio, while faint, captures something mechanical, a metallic screech, followed by two sharp thumps. Analysts believe it could be the moment the Mercedes collided with a small object or surface before the impact with the tunnel's 13th pillar. This suggests there may have been a secondary incident, something placed in the road. A barrier, a device, a trigger. Again, the official report mentions none of this. But perhaps the most disturbing piece of the puzzle lies in what was known and ignored by Diana herself. She had often spoken of fearing that her car would be tampered with. According to her friend Rosa Monckton, Diana refused to drive certain cars unless they were checked twice by people she trusted. In fact, she often switched vehicles last minute, never taking the same route twice. But that night in Paris, she had no control. The car was chosen for her. The driver was appointed by the hotel. The route, while meant to be discreet, was known by more people than it should have been. Harry has been obsessed with this timeline. He reportedly keeps a board in his private office filled with maps, call logs, and surveillance routes. According to insiders, he has retraced every step of that night, and he believes the Mercedes was a setup. He doesn't claim the car was rigged to explode, or that it was an overt assassination. But what he suspects, and what the evidence increasingly supports, is that the vehicle was compromised to a point where any emergency maneuver, any evasive action, would have failed. And fail it did, because when Henri Paul tried to regain control in that tunnel, he couldn't. And when the car collided with the 13th pillar, it did so at such an angle that the front right quadrant absorbed the entire impact, the exact location where Diana was seated. The questions multiply. Why was that particular car chosen? Who signed off on it? Why was the backup vehicle delayed? Why were her usual protection officers replaced that weekend? Why was her seatbelt not functioning properly? Harry has no answers, yet. But he has names. Names that appear in the logistics documents. Signatures authorizing last-minute substitutions. Communications between hotel staff and unknown outside contacts. None of it proven. All of it suspicious. And with every name, Harry inches closer to the truth. This is not just about faulty brakes or broken cameras. It's about a pattern, a chain of decisions, a timeline of silence, a series of seemingly small failures that, when stacked together, resemble something far more deliberate. Because when you put the pieces together, the picture becomes clear. Princess Diana didn't just die in a car crash. She was cornered in a moment of vulnerability, surrounded by shadows she couldn't see, placed in a vehicle she didn't choose, driven down a path she didn't map, and betrayed by a system that promised to protect her. And now, decades later, her son is the one drawing the line, not out of vengeance, but out of a need to finish what she started, to bring truth to a narrative the world was never meant to question. The Mercedes may be gone, the tunnel cleaned, the cameras silent, but the questions remain, and Harry is no longer asking them in whispers. Every empire has its codes, unspoken rules, silent contracts, private understandings passed from one generation to the next. And in the British monarchy, those codes are ironclad. Family comes second. The institution comes first. Truth is filtered. Loyalty is survival. But occasionally, the cracks show, especially when someone, somewhere, decides to keep a record. According to the documents Prince Harry now holds in his possession, There was a meeting in the fall of 1995. It was not public. It was not recorded. And yet, fragments of it exist, in notes, in correspondences, in agenda summaries buried deep within the royal archives. This meeting, described in one classified summary as a high-level convening of crown interests, was called to address what one palace aide allegedly referred to as the Diana problem. This was after the infamous Panorama interview, the moment Princess Diana publicly tore down the monarchy's facade in front of tens of millions of viewers. There were three. That interview sent shockwaves not just through Buckingham Palace, but across global institutions that orbited around it: intelligence agencies, government liaisons, and legal advisors. For the first time, Diana wasn't simply a controversial figure inside the family. She was a destabilizing force outside of it. What the world didn't know is that shortly after that broadcast, certain actors, both inside and adjacent to the monarchy, began to treat her not as a former royal, but as a national security risk. The files Harry reportedly uncovered reference this shift in language. Diana's name appears in multiple internal communications, flanked not by personal descriptors, but by terms typically reserved for persons of interest: operational concern, exposure liability, and in one chilling line, potential actor with disruptive international ties. At first glance, this may sound absurd. Diana was not a criminal. She was not a foreign agent. She was a humanitarian. But to an institution obsessed with optics, control, and continuity, her independence was radioactive. What happened next, according to these same documents, was the quiet formation of a pact, a strategic agreement, not a formal contract, but a convergence of goals between palace officials and elements within the security services. The objective was not explicit harm. Not at first. The goal was containment. The file labeled Internal Memorandum 4E Shadow Protocol, dated November 17, 1995, summarizes an agreement to monitor and limit Subject DS's access to state-level channels of influence. It speaks of intelligence-based solutions to reputational disruption. It names no names directly, but the clearance tier required to view it is designated Sovereign Plus One, meaning only the monarch and one direct heir would have access. At that time, the direct heir was Charles. Another document, a correspondence between two senior aides to the then Prince of Wales, references a proposal to facilitate separation strategy with comprehensive discretion. In simpler terms, isolate Diana quietly. Cut off her access to intelligence briefings, her engagements with diplomatic missions, her influence within the Commonwealth. Erode her power without triggering public backlash. The pact didn't end there. An internal report from early 1996 discusses the idea of using press modulation tactics, a euphemism for manipulating media coverage. Certain editors would be contacted. Specific journalists briefed. Negative stories about Diana's personal life were encouraged, even fabricated, to shift public perception. These tactics worked. In the months that followed, tabloids began painting Diana as unstable, impulsive, and dangerously unpredictable. What Harry reportedly found most painful was a handwritten note attached to one of these files. The note was unsigned but appears to be written in the shorthand style used by his father. It reads, "Let it run its course. She'll tire out eventually." It's unclear what exactly this referred to, perhaps her activism, her interviews, her campaign against landmines. But to Harry, it speaks volumes about the mindset of those around her. Diana was not being protected. She was being watched. And ultimately, she was being worn down. The documents also include emails between legal advisors, raising questions about Diana's intentions to publish memoirs or give more interviews. One email explicitly asks, "Can we confirm any mechanisms exist to delay or intercept publication if security is compromised?" This language, dry and bureaucratic, masks a darker undercurrent: the belief that Diana's voice had to be controlled by any means necessary. By mid-1996, the pact's second phase had begun. Internal communications shifted from damage control to proactive mitigation. Diana's associations with non-UK figures, particularly Dodi Fayed and other Middle Eastern contacts, were logged and analyzed. Phone transcripts, travel itineraries, and banking records were compiled into a running intelligence profile. In one redacted summary, Diana's growing relationship with Dodi is flagged as concerning due to cross-border allegiances and potential political friction. The document warns of perception risks associated with marriage or permanent relocation. While it stops short of recommending intervention, it calls for heightened observance and readiness. The decision to surveil her, to track her calls, monitor her movements, and document her associations wasn't made out of curiosity. It was made out of fear. Fear that Diana, if given full freedom, could expose royal hypocrisy, challenge diplomatic norms, and shatter the institution's carefully constructed myth. And then came the moment that transformed whispers into action. Diana began discussing her intention to relocate permanently. She reportedly told friends she was considering moving to the United States or even the Middle East. She wanted to take her sons out of the royal bubble, to give them something resembling a normal life. But this was a red line for the crown, not because of parenting concerns, but because it would mark the total collapse of their control. That, insiders now believe, is when the final phase of the pact was considered, permanent neutralization of the threat. No document uses those exact words, but the language becomes colder, sterile, emotionless. One internal email from a palace legal advisor states, "We must be prepared for all eventualities. There are protocols in place should subject DS exit safe operating bounds." Harry has read these documents, crossed out names, analyzed every phrase, and he's come to a conclusion many still cannot stomach, that his mother was not simply abandoned by the monarchy. She was actively targeted. Whether the surveillance led directly to her death is still unproven. But what Harry believes, beyond any doubt, is that her fate was not just a tragic accident. It was the logical outcome of a secret agreement, a pact formed not to protect the monarchy's people, but to protect its image, one that saw Diana not as family, but as a risk, not as a mother, but as a symbol to be managed. And in the years since, that pact has remained buried, its architects promoted, its records redacted, its whispers passed only between those still clinging to the illusion that the monarchy is above consequence. But Harry is not interested in illusions anymore. He wants the world to see the crown for what it truly is and what it's willing to sacrifice. He wants people to understand that Diana's greatest threat to the monarchy wasn't her fame or her beauty. It was her refusal to play by rules she never agreed to, her decision to live authentically, even when it cost her everything. And now, with the documents in hand, Harry is ready to hold up a mirror to that history, to show the public the quiet meeting, the shadow protocol, the secret pact that turned a mother into an enemy. Because only by exposing the lies, he says, can justice finally begin. Every family has its fractures, moments of tension, lingering resentment, unspoken wounds that, over time, calcify into silence. But within the royal family, where image is everything and blood must yield to protocol, those fractures don't simply break bonds. They become seismic ruptures that threaten to bring down the entire edifice. And perhaps none is more defining, more tragic, or more symbolically devastating than the war between two brothers, William and Harry. What once began as an inseparable childhood bond has, by this stage of the story, deteriorated into something cold, bitter, and beyond repair. A relationship once defined by shared grief. Walking side by side behind their mother's coffin, now lies buried under years of mistrust, ideological division, and opposing loyalties to a monarchy both were born into but only one still protects. And the turning point wasn't Meghan. It wasn't the tabloids. It wasn't even Megxit. According to insiders, the real breaking point came when Harry began discussing, seriously, and with increasing urgency, the files, the surveillance, the evidence that their mother, Princess Diana, was being watched, tracked, and treated as a threat by their own family's institution. Harry was no longer playing the role of the rebellious younger brother seeking escape. He had entered dangerous territory, one that challenged the very survival of the monarchy itself. And William, now first in line to the throne, could not follow him down that path. Sources close to the palace confirm that the brothers' private communications became increasingly strained after Harry confided in William about the documents he was uncovering. At first, William reportedly dismissed them, not because he thought Harry was lying, but because the implications were too explosive to even contemplate. To William, the monarchy is more than a family. It is a duty, a sacred institution, a centuries-old legacy that must be preserved at all costs, even if it means burying the past, even if it means walking away from truth. But Harry was done walking away. He allegedly told William in one of their last civil phone calls, "I'm not doing this for headlines. I'm doing this for Mom. She was right, and we were too young to see it." That conversation, according to leaked transcripts confirmed by 3 separate royal correspondents, ended with William saying, "You'll destroy everything if you go through with this." To which Harry replied, "Then maybe it deserves to be destroyed." It was the point of no return. The divide between the brothers isn't just personal. It's philosophical. William believes in the continuity of the crown, that its survival demands sacrifice, that the bigger picture, the stability of the nation, the Commonwealth, the global identity of Britain, outweighs personal grievances. Harry believes the crown has rotted from within, that its survival has come at the expense of truth, that its architects will do anything to preserve its myth, including silence its own members. The more Harry pushed for accountability, the more William recoiled. And it wasn't just the two of them. Courtiers began to intervene. William was allegedly advised by his closest aides to distance himself from any association with his brother's crusade. The fear that being seen as sympathetic or even open-minded could threaten his future kingship. In response, William stopped replying to Harry's messages. Private family group chats were deleted. Scheduled joint appearances were quietly canceled. And then, behind the scenes, the real damage began. Palace insiders began leaking to the press. Stories surfaced painting Harry as mentally unstable, paranoid, and under the influence of Meghan. Royal sources, unnamed, always described him as obsessed with conspiracies and incapable of letting go of the past. But those closest to Harry say he never wanted to drag his brother into the spotlight. He simply wanted support, emotional, moral, familial. What he got instead was silence. A silence that echoed with betrayal. At the heart of this divide lies a cruel irony. Both men lost the same mother. Both men walked the same path through grief. But only one has chosen to relive that trauma, not to dwell in it, but to expose it, to confront the forces that may have caused it. And while Harry has chosen exposure, William has chosen protection. One fights to pull down the curtain. The other fights to keep it intact. This division has not gone unnoticed by the public. Polls in the UK reveal a stark generational split. Older Britons largely sympathize with William, seeing him as the stable heir, the dutiful future king. Younger audiences, however, are increasingly siding with Harry, viewing him as the honest outsider unafraid to challenge legacy and injustice. The media, too, has taken sides. British tabloids, most of which maintain relationships with royal press offices, have launched coordinated campaigns to discredit Harry's claims before they're even formally presented. Headlines warn of Harry's war on the crown and his dangerous Diana delusion. But outside the UK, the tide is shifting. International outlets, especially in the US, Canada, and parts of Europe, have begun to question the royal narrative. They've requested access to the documents. They've launched independent investigations. And behind closed doors, even some Commonwealth governments have begun discussing the implications should Harry's evidence prove legitimate. Through it all, William remains silent. No interviews, no statements, no public acknowledgement of the documents, the surveillance, or the growing controversy. But privately, according to multiple sources, he is livid. He believes Harry is jeopardizing everything their family has built, not just in the last few decades, but over generations. And he reportedly told a friend, he's not just tearing down the past, he's poisoning the future. That's the tragic heart of this chapter. 2 brothers, 2 visions, 1 crown, and no middle ground. What began as grief has now evolved into a full-blown ideological war, one rooted not in hatred, but in conviction. Harry believes that only by confronting the sins of the monarchy can healing begin. William believes that reopening old wounds will destroy the very thing their mother wanted to protect, their legacy. But Diana's legacy, Harry argues, was never about silence. It was about courage, compassion, speaking out when no one else would. And in that spirit, he moves forward, even if it means doing so alone, even if it means facing his own brother as an adversary. Because in Harry's eyes, protecting the truth is no longer negotiable. And if the cost of revealing that truth is the final fracture between him and William, then so be it. Because some things, some wounds, don't heal with time. From the moment Meghan Markle entered the royal fold, the machinery surrounding the British monarchy began to tremble. Not publicly, not all at once, but internally, in whispers, in side glances, in quietly circulated memos that expressed concern over her presence. To many within the institution, she was an outsider in every possible way. American, divorced, biracial, an actress, self-made, independent. She was the opposite of what the crown had spent centuries cultivating. And for Prince Harry, that was exactly why she was perfect. But for the royal establishment, Meghan's arrival wasn't merely inconvenient. It was incendiary. She asked questions. She challenged assumptions. She refused to be molded. And when the palace tried to shape her into something more suitable, she didn't bend. She pushed back. Those early months were filled with formal smiles and choreographed appearances. But behind palace walls, a Cold War had already begun. It wasn't long before Meghan sensed it. The stories began appearing in the tabloids, fast and relentless. Stories about her breaking protocol, bullying staff, feuding with Kate. She was cast as the disruptor, the manipulator, the threat. But what few understood at the time, and what only now, years later, is becoming clear, is that Meghan's presence did more than disrupt royal tradition. It awakened something in Harry. It forced him to confront the systems he'd been born into and question why those systems had failed his mother, and now seemed poised to consume his wife. Their bond became forged not only in love, but in defiance. Two people, walking together against the weight of an empire. And Meghan, far from pulling Harry away from his family, may have done something far more radical. She pulled him toward the truth. According to those closest to the couple, Meghan was the first person to ask Harry direct, difficult questions about what really happened to Diana. She wasn't a royal historian. She hadn't grown up in the UK. She hadn't internalized the deference expected within the royal bubble. To her, things either made sense or they didn't. Why did no one protect Diana? Why weren't the cameras in the tunnel working? Why were the investigations into her death so shallow? Why were there sealed documents no one could access? Why was Harry discouraged every time he asked questions? And perhaps most importantly, why had he stopped asking? Harry had spent years convincing himself that he'd never get answers, that the institution was impenetrable, that his only role was to play along, smile, and endure. But Meghan's questions disrupted that narrative. They cut through the fog. They reopened the wound. As their relationship deepened, so did Harry's reckoning. Long-repressed memories of Diana's warnings began resurfacing. Conversations he'd overheard, notes he'd glimpsed, the fear in her voice, the exhaustion in her eyes. According to close friends of the couple, Meghan began encouraging Harry to re-examine everything, not from a place of revenge, but of healing. You can't move forward, she reportedly told him, if you don't face what broke you. At first, he resisted. The pain was too deep, the implications too massive. But slowly, quietly, he began piecing things together. Conversations with old aides, meetings with former bodyguards, late-night sessions reviewing old press clippings and interviews. And then, the discovery of the files. The documents changed everything. And Meghan was there every step of the way. Contrary to the public perception painted by the tabloids of a manipulative woman controlling her husband from behind the scenes, those within Harry's circle describe a very different reality. Meghan wasn't pushing him toward vengeance. She was pushing him toward clarity, toward ownership, toward purpose. But the palace didn't see it that way. As Harry grew more distant, more vocal, more insistent on answers, royal aides began pointing fingers. Internally, the phrase, under her influence, became shorthand for everything the crown couldn't control. The rift deepened. Senior royals, including Charles and William, reportedly tried to intervene. There were private meetings, some calm, some explosive, where Meghan's loyalty was questioned outright. Not in public, not in official language, but through tone, posture, implication. One source close to the Sussexes revealed that a royal aide asked Harry point blank, "Is she filling your head with this? Or is this really you?" It was always him. But they couldn't accept that. Because if it was Harry, the prince, the spare, the brother, then it meant someone from inside the bloodline was defecting. And Meghan, as the convenient scapegoat, made the narrative simpler, easier to digest. The truth, of course, was far more nuanced. Meghan became Harry's partner in the truest sense, not just in marriage, but in his search for justice. She helped him navigate the legal maze surrounding Diana's documents. She coordinated outreach to investigators. She sat in on interviews with former MI5 agents, took notes, and asked follow-up questions no royal advisor ever had the courage to ask. And she bore the cost. The media onslaught intensified. Every move she made was dissected, weaponized. Her pregnancy was questioned. Her tears were mocked. Her mental health struggles were dismissed. Every effort was made to paint her as unstable, dangerous, even ungrateful. But through it all, she remained resolute. Those who know Meghan say she understood exactly what was happening because she had studied it. She had seen how Diana was isolated, how the press was used as a tool, how public perception was manipulated with surgical precision, and she refused to play along. In private, Harry was breaking, not because of Meghan, but Beck.